Brennan, Jayme, welcome to the Eighth Lane podcast.
Thanks. We're stoked to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to do our first ever duo episode with you guys. It should be pretty fun.
Yeah, I'll try not to get excited and talk over everybody.
That's okay. If you do, we'll
Okay.
stop you. They'll kick you or something under the table.
All right.
Yeah, so this is Brennan and Jayme, and they started a race series called Speedmo, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you guys both want to just give a brief introduction of who you are, kind of what you do, just for our listeners who might not know who you are?
You go ahead.
Go for it.
I'm Jayme Kogel, and what do? I'm just really passionate about outdoors and people. I'm in sales as a profession, and I just really like building valuable connections in community. And the outdoors is a great place to do that, especially across different types of sports and stuff. And so I've just found a lot of passion in that. Personally, I love learning new things. So I'm kind of a hobby slut. I do all the things all the time, and I'm always open to trying new stuff. That's what led me to learn all sorts of different Alpine skills and whatnot, just by being curious. Yeah, a lot of my friends are really good at a lot of things they do. So it's me keeping up with them keeps me on point, which is really fun. But yeah, that's how I came across Brennan.
Yeah, we met through flying through a race that Jayme had put on, and so it's kind of brought a friendship here, and we're creating together now. I've historically run a lot since I was 11. I think just kind of started running outside on my own using Map My Run. I think was the early website way before Strava.
Gosh,
and all.
I remember Map My Run.
Kind of use it and then try to memorize it visually before I left the house, so I knew all the turns to take because I didn't drive yet and didn't know the roads. So started running and just did different sports, tennis, and picked up climbing when I was young too. Had an interest in that. Lived in Boulder for a little bit before coming out to Provo, and both just great mountain towns. The access here in Utah to the Wasatch is amazing. So a lot of climbing and trail running. And then I watched people flying for years and wanted to get into it, but didn't happen until just recently in the last couple of years.
Watch people flying as in just in the Alpine world, or since you were a kid?
Yeah, just became friends through running community with a group of friends like Andy DeRay, Jason DeRay, and they've flown for I think maybe 8 years now, 9 years, something like that.
They're so
7
sweet.
at the time I talked to them. They're
What
they're
did their
fast at
parents
everything.
give them growing up? I'm I want to talk to their parents.
They grew up playing football in Indiana, actually.
Okay.
Probably honed the athletic focus there. But Yeah.
Yeah,
And then now just have a family, so I'm bringing up kids in the outdoors and trying to figure out balance between what me and my wife spend time doing and how to support them and kind of launch them into the world and help them find out what they want to do.
I know you guys went to Chamonix for your wife this last August or whatever, and I saw you guys taking your kids on a bunch of climbing routes, and it looked super fun. They're going to be little athletes. They're going to be crazy.
It's a little expensive to take a family to Europe, but it was really fun.
Yeah, that's very cool. So maybe give our listeners, either of you, kind of a description of what Speedmo is and what flying is, and where it kind of fits in the Alpine community.
Yeah. Flying is just a really cool outlet. The human experience of flying has been very varied across history. And now we're at a certain point where the wing technology is so advanced that it's super safe, super stable, and makes it very accessible for people, especially alpinists looking to travel through the mountains more efficiently. Speedmo is actually short for speed mountaineering. We are really passionate about giving athletes an outlet to show their skills in alpinism and their abilities to move quickly and efficiently through mountains. Flying is an aspect of that is really, really wonderful because it's safe now. It makes things more, approachable. Your descents don't have to be 8-12 hours anymore. You can get down in 30 minutes in that case by bringing a flying kit with you on any sort of mission that you do, which is really exciting. And yeah, I forgot the rest of the question. But.
No, yeah, I think that kind of gives a pretty good description of what flying is, where it fits. I historically had only really heard of base jumping in regards to alpinism and flying, and so I just kind of had written it off a few years ago as just psycho people, I guess.
Yep.
That were just really brave. And then this last year when I went to France, just talking to a bunch of people who lived there, it was oh no, a lot of people paraglide off of the mountain. So it is a little more friendly than I think I had thought it was, if that makes sense.
I think you're a great representation of the general populace of humans. And that's fair. Like people being 3,000 feet in the air hanging from nylon doesn't seem very reassuring. But flying in general is actually quite safe and approachable. To give a good reference point, like typically the max forward speed of a new pilot's paraglider is 15 miles an hour. So you're not really nuking through the sky, and it's pretty chill to like learn. And it's really approachable. Like when you sign up for lessons for paragliding, Salt Lake is one of the best places in the world to learn. You're going to be flying your first day. You'll be off the ground like 5-10 feet, not too high, but you'll get a good experience. And the instructors out here are world class too, so it's really accessible. But yeah, the general public is like, they see people in the sky and like, oh, those people are crazy. You know, they don't actually realize that those people are just nerdy about weather. You know, it's not like they're not crazy. They're very calculated. They're very prepared, and they really like that type of fun that takes a bit more research and preparation. You know. And that kind of goes across all alpine sports in general, like, you know, extreme climbing or summit, you know, pursuits and whatnot. Take quite a bit of nerdiness to get prepared and, you know, study to get, you know, efficient at it. And I think that once people kind of understand how the wing technology works, it kind of gets rid of that misconception of the safety and approachability of it. You want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, ironically, flying started as just a means to get in the air and not be on the ground. And so some early experiments, I believe in France, with some of the early like hand-sewn just wings and experiments there, they were kind of gliding down hills, kind of like a Buzz Lightyear, you know, falling with style type of a thing. And then it quickly became pragmatic and feasible to fly. And they were able to shape foils that could, you know, glide efficiently. And then it became actually about staying in the air. And so ironically, like Speedmo is a little bit more related to and focused to it, you know, flying as a descent mechanism. But paragliding's birth was to be in the air, and people do fly full paragliders, full-size wings, with the goal of staying in the air for a long time, riding thermals and actually gaining altitude and flying long distances. And so within the Speedmo circle, we're going to touch more the faster side of flying as a descent mechanism for speed in the mountains. But there's also this other side of speed in terms of being able to travel across, you know, cavernous valleys on a wing potentially faster than you could in other means. So
yeah, that's very cool, also very handy, I guess, like being an alpine athlete to be able to like speed things up a little bit too, because I mean, sometimes 30-40 hours on the mountain isn't feasible or possible in certain conditions.
Yeah. And that range of flight potential really opens it up to a range of like risk levels, tolerance levels. But I think in general, the story of people getting into flying does start with this breakdown of expectations from like super dangerous to then they learn a little bit more, and kind of like your example of just like the walls start falling down and you realize like this isn't just crazy people, kind of like Jayme was talking about. It's you know, people that just want a new tool in their quiver in the mountains and want to try something new, and that it is a little safer to get into than people would realize on first blush.
So kind of with that, I want to transition into like how you two got into the sport. Maybe talk a little bit about your personal history with like where are your passions in like the outdoor sport community, and then how did that transition into flying or paragliding?
Well, I got into flying because I was chasing a girl. I met my partner on an app, and she had a picture of herself in a wingsuit, and I was like, oh, this girl's way too cool for me. And then we matched, and I was like, oh, let's go. Turns out she had retired from wingsuit base jumping and got into paragliding. And so I decided to quit my job and learn how to skydive and paraglide at the same time to keep up with her. Because she'd be like, oh, I'm going paragliding this weekend. And I was like, okay, I need to be able to like do this. So I went and learned all that stuff. It was something I'd never considered, right? I always thought of it as like kind of sketchy, kind of scary, like adrenaline junkie kind of thing. And while I was a downhill snowboard racer and pretty big into like alpine stuff in general, I'd never considered flight. But after I took my first lesson, I was like, oh, like everyone that's learning with me is super nerdy, and this is really chill. It's not scary at all. It's very intuitive. Like, oh, I want to turn right. I pull right toggle a little bit, you know, and like, you know, it was just a very approachable sport. I learned in California in Milpitas on these really cool mountains out there. And
Are
yeah,
those coastal? Or are they inland?
they're inland a little bit,
Okay.
but they're kind of protected. But the coastal soaring is a really great place to learn too. If you're learning on a beach, the sand is soft, so you can kind of land and launch it a bunch of times and get, current with that.
So learning, what was like, what were kind of the biggest barriers for you of like, okay, this is like a scary mental hurdle I need to get over, or it was difficult to like learn the technique of something? Was there anything like that? Learning?
Yeah, it's a sufferfest learning, right? You're learning a new skill, how to manipulate a nylon or an air-filled nylon bag, basically, right? You're
That
pulling
you're like dangling off of in the sky. Like that, to me, honestly, sounds terrifying.
Yeah, it's so relaxing and chill, and it's quiet, and you're not moving very fast. Like,
I don't know how you feel, but it's the getting to the sky part that's the tricky part at the beginning.
yeah.
Okay.
Once you're in the sky, it's very intuitive and you're loading the wing. And so it doesn't want to do anything really that you don't
Okay.
tell it to do. But when it's on the ground, it's a little bit different. And that's the harder
Yeah.
thing to learn.
That's the big thing, is like learning what the kite's going to do when you're on the ground before you fly, and controlling it and putting inputs on there. When you're in the sky, it's pressurized. And honestly, with an A-rated wing, which is the safest, it goes A, B, C, and on. It's really hard to mess it up. Like you have to like actively really try to screw around with it to make it deform or, not perform properly. It wants to be open. It wants to be flying the way it's built. And so they're relatively, quite exceptionally safe. Typically the wing is not going to have issues if you've done, proper forecasting and not launched in bad wind, things like that. And that's all the stuff you learn during your lessons as well.
What would be bad wind? Like inconsistent wind or
Gusty
Yeah.
and thermic wind. So
Okay.
wind that's very like wind that's being caused by a lot of ground heating, and it will
Okay.
create really bubbly air, as it's called. Those are kind of the two main factors.
Mm-hmm.
But turbulence comes from those two things. And turbulence for a wing, like a plane can cut through the wind a lot more effectively because it's going so fast. Like Jayme said earlier, like with 15 mile an hour wind speed or a trim speed, you're not punching through turbulence very well. And so you have to fly in
riding it?
calmer, more laminar air, stuff that's
Okay.
smooth. If it's bumpy, that's where things can happen.
So is colder air better?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
So there's also the gust factor, right? If wind is all consistently flowing, right, and say it's like 12 gusting 13, it's going to feel smooth, right? But if it's 10 gusting 25, there's going to be punchy gusts coming and hitting you in headwind and whatnot, and you're going to be feeling very tossed around. And so that's why forecasting is a big part of it, understanding weather, making sure you're aware of the wind and the wind currents in your local area where you're flying. It's a really, like I said, it gets really nerdy, and it's really exciting to dive into all the different aspects of flying. But where we're at now with the technology and the understanding of weather patterns makes this a very viable addition to Alpine setups. It didn't used to be. The weight of this equipment used to be pretty intense, and it didn't make sense to carry it up a mountain with you because it'd just be exhausting. But now you can get flying kits down to 1.5 kilograms. So it's a no-brainer to add that to your summit kit or whatever you're taking if it saves you 12 hours on a descent somewhere potentially, right? And so it's just an incredibly viable solution. And all the wing manufacturers now realize that, hey, we need to make ultralight setups. And so that's what the market's going to. And it's making it more approachable and realistic for all athletes to add this to their kit and their skill set, to be not only just to move through mountains faster, but to be competitive in things like Speedmo. It's just a super viable option, and we're lucky to live in a time where it makes sense.
This episode is brought to you by Mercedes Benz Van Center Warner, Utah's largest selection of recreational and commercial vans for all purposes, new, pre-owned, and rentals. They are passionate about supporting the running and active community in Utah. Check them out at mbvancenterwarner.com. So kind of back to your origin story.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. Why did you niche into flying so much? Like, I mean, I'm sure you have a million other hobbies. You said you'd like picking up new hobbies, but you like created this company around flying. So did you take it and kind of niche into it even more, or what happened from there?
Flying is just really cool. I mean, once people get into it, they kind of put all their other hobbies like as a secondary, right? Like maybe you're like Brennan and you're a runner, but Brennan now runs and flies a lot, and he puts flying into like a majority of his efforts. Right?
I know, I was peeking at your Strava. I couldn't see yours, but you have a lot of like hike and flies
yeah.
on there.
Try
I
to
was
go
like,
at
wow,
least
he does this like
once
once
or
a week.
twice a week. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's a consistent, joyous experience, right? And the humans aren't supposed to fly. Like, you're not supposed to be up there with the birds, but we hacked our way in, you know, and we're having a good time up there. For me, I enjoy just the experience of it. I like to fly in different ways. I have a bunch of different wings, and I like to either, you know, I fly my full size to explore for long periods of time for hours and just go check out different ranges here in the Wasatch. Or sometimes I just want to get a quick like adrenaline lap in with my speed wing after work or before work. And, you know, I go hike Cherry Logging Trail, you know, get that done in a couple hours and just have a good time with friends, you know, and it's just a really cool experience. But it kind of ties it all together because you get to nerd out and like really understand all the aspects of it, right? Like, there's a mental effort to it. You have to forecast, you have to pack all your gear up, you have to make sure all your checks are good. Then you get to do the cardio effort of the climb, and then you get the thrill of flying back down rapidly and like, you know, sometimes proxy flying next to terrain or trying out a new, you know, maneuver in the air is really, really fun. You know, speed wings are known for being high adrenaline, doing barrel rolls, proxy flying, things like that. They don't have to be flown that way if you don't want to. You can fly them very stable and straight and have a really good time regardless. And so that's another thing, is like niching into the sport of flying for me has been kind of like pulling the curtains back and like realizing that, hey, this is actually a really approachable experience for everyone. It doesn't have to be adrenaline fueled or like, you know, death wishy. You know, people look at, like you said earlier, like,
Yeah.
it doesn't have to feel that way or it'd be that way if you like get experience with it. Maximizing on it, I just saw a need here to add flight as a legitimate form of alpinism. And I like to solve things that I'm frustrated about. And I was frustrated about the market's, I say the market, but like the outdoor industry's opinion of fly sports. You know, national parks ban them quite a few often. You can't do it in Yosemite National Park.
You like to sing them like silly.
Yeah, and you're not allowed to fly in them. And I think that's ridiculous. You're allowed to climb and risk your life in a national park, but you can't fly when flying's actually exponentially safer if done right.
So why did they ban?
I think it's because of initially base jumping, but
there were a lot of accidents and stuff with base jumping.
Yeah, and they say that it might disturb birds, but people walking disturb birds.
Okay.
You know,
And
actually,
there's still illegal base jumping, and so I think that keeps the fire fanned
yeah,
a little bit.
Yeah.
So there's just more risky sports that get grouped by what we call the muggles.
yeah, non-flying people
into one category, you know, even though they're distinct sports and have different communities and different levels of risk involved.
Yeah, it's actually, you know, this fact came upon me and it's kind of silly, but flying is actually more sustainable for nature than hiking, because you're not hiking back down the trail and causing even further erosion or disturbing animals. You're actually just flying back down, not disturbing anything. Maybe a few birds are like, hey, what bird is that? But other than that, like, you're not doing anything. And it's a really cool and sustainable sport. Like, it's all human powered, right? You know, once you have your wing, it's just like, it's sweat equity to get anything done. And I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, that's very cool. I met someone who had said like she will never, like, if there's not like a gondola to take down the mountain, she'll always fly down the mountain because she's like, I want to do this sport for forever and I want to save my knees. So because she like had bad knees or something, so that's why she got into flying. And honestly, like, her perspective there of like kind of being health conscious about it almost is like what kind of opened my mind a little bit to like, oh, okay, so there's like a reason people do this other than just like adrenaline. Yeah,
walking down is miserable. Like, why would you
does
want to
take
walk
forever,
down? Like, that's so,
honestly.
it's like jarring. The human body's made in a weird shape to like fit that. Like, think about it. Yeah, it's just like a ton of weird impact on your knees and your hips and everything. Like, why not just float down and having a great time and shave off a bunch of effort? Yeah, I have a physical therapy degree, and like, yeah, people's wear and tear on downhill stuff like shin splints is just, it's very real. You know, I mean, you guys are ultra runners, right? Like, you know what I'm talking about. Like, I don't know.
Definitely.
downhill can hurt.
Yeah.
Well, what about you, Brennan? Like, it seems like you kind of have a strong background in like running in the mountains. A lot of like your FKT efforts, I guess, are kind of running based. Some of them more like scrambly, but
Yeah.
what turned you to flying?
Yeah, I'd just been watching friends that we'd met years ago, and they flew, and it like slowly developed as this concept that was actually something that I could do instead of just watching. And then those barriers came down of learning about. I remember I saw a chart that showed like fatalities per 1,000 hours of participation, and realized that like paragliding was on there actually behind mountain biking, like, which I don't know anybody that's died mountain biking, but I certainly like have seen anybody I know that mountain bikes aggressively breaks their collarbone every couple of years.
Seriously.
And
Or
sometimes
their face,
concussions.
honestly.
Yeah.
Bloody nose.
And so it kind of like broke down the risk. And then I asked these friends about, how do you get into this, and learned about the progression and how long it takes to do lessons. And then I was like, well, I actually don't want to do them that fast. People will fly in and get certified with what's called their introductory license, called a P2, in like less than 14 days when they come from out of state, because they're on that clock. But I kind of stretched it out over a couple of months, and just had my eyes opened wide to like the weather and considerations. And then you get educated on, some of the aerodynamics and kind of all the different aspects that play into it. And it's a very intellectually stimulating thing to engage with, in a way that I love running, but it's not quite as intellectually stimulating. I mean, I nerd out on maps and grades and where you can travel and where you can't. And same thing with skiing. But the thing that really stuck out to me in that progression was, my friend Jason mentioned this comment that was, it's like, it's a sport that you do when the safe conditions are also the best conditions for the sport, which is very different than backcountry skiing. I've backcountry skied a lot. I love hitting couloirs. I love doing that. I'm not somebody that chases powder runs in glades. I just don't live to ski, but I enjoy it. I'd rather be running. But flying is like, it tops that, because unlike skiing, where it's, super dangerous, the better the skiing is, generally speaking. You're going to have avalanche when there's great powder. With flying, it's like, the calmer the wind, the better. And it's also when it's safer. So it's a nice tool to have in the quiver for most days. And, places like the Alps are really calm. The Wasatch is not quite as calm when it comes to wind, but you can fly many times a week if you have the time for it. So it's still a pretty nice place to engage with.
And it seems like I saw, again, on your Strava, like in the running world, there are a lot of like, in Salt Lake, there's a lot of like really iconic routes or mountains that people will like try to do different efforts on, like the South Ridge of Superior or Grandeur. Like there's just a lot of like really iconic routes. And it seems like with flying too, there are certain, what I'm picking up at least, is there are certain routes that are more popular. And it almost seems like you're trying to get better times on those routes with like transitions or techniques, or even maybe like flight pattern down the mountain. Is that a thing?
Yeah.
And
I've dabbled in Speedmo a little bit, like several years ago. I started like dabbling in that. There's a great organization here that does Tuesday night Speedmo events, and that's where, for those that maybe aren't as familiar, you're trying to go for a really fast round trip through a course, and it's got uphill and downhill on skis, so you're skinning, and your transitions become a big factor. And transition speed is something that really drew me to this when Jayme hosted the first 2 Speedmo races as an experiment this last spring. It really was interesting to me, because I was like somewhat recently into flying, but it's like from these other sports where I'm not the fastest person, but I really like nerding out on how can you make this fast overall, partly because I have a family. And so my morning efforts they have to be fast and efficient. Like I don't have time to run really slow and casual if I want to like be engaging with those sports early in the morning and get to work on time. And so I think it fits in really well. Some of the bigger lines, I think Cherry's maybe 2,200 vertical feet. 2,400. And
where do you launch off of Cherry?
so partway up, there's the standard like kind of paragliding launch. It's the first place the trail isn't steep, is about 2.2 miles up.
It like cuts south.
You go up a steep little climb, and then you cut around the right side, and you're looking into what is Cherry Canyon up there, and before it faces Ennis Peak. And so when you get there, there's a nice grassy area. There's usually like a little stick with some flyers, a little plastic streamers on it. And that's what, for the paragliders looking at wind direction.
Oh,
but
cool.
you can circle that, or you can round trip that in like an hour.
Oh, dang.
So you can hit the trailhead if you're fast and get up there and fly, and you can land and be at your car in an hour. And so it really cuts down the time in the mountains on some of these big efforts. People will fly off, Broad Fork Twins, some of these bigger peaks, that take, this average good athlete, maybe 2 hours to get up to those summits or more. And then you do a descent in 10 minutes. And so.
Yeah, that's kind of awesome. The worst part about Cherry Canyon is coming down.
Exactly.
I hate
It's
going
not
down
a great
Cherry
downhill trail.
Canyon.
There's
good trails for downhill. That's not one of them.
Yeah, there's a race this weekend where people are running down that twice or 3 times, and I'm like, ew, like why would you do that?
You're like
yourself?
handing out flyers.
Yeah, I'm like,
You're
learn
"Hey,
to fly,
guys."
One thing I wanted to highlight too is like flying is the aspect of Speedmo that makes it unique, and that's why we started with it, right? I hosted the first event because I was like, hey, all these guys are incredible athletes. Let's see how fast they can go and how they can lap this one classic line at Cherry Logging Trail. And so
is this an unofficial event that you were just like, hey, everyone that I know,
basically
come to Cherry Canyon?
It started with like 12 people in a
Okay.
group chat, and then it blew up to like 150. And it was like, I don't know. Some people have come in, some people come out, whatever. But like it was supposed to be like a small get together. It just the popularity got crazy. And then we got brand support. Like, I mean, this brand support from the feed was amazing. They're an incredible company to support us. And and like they just came in wholeheartedly and said, hey, like we want to help out. They sponsored a wing, which is really cool.
It's cool.
But anyways, it was started off really small, and then the interest grew. And so when we first had it, we had like 60 people over 2 weekends go and compete.
Wow.
And men and women, and it was just really awesome.
So how did you organize that? Like, does everyone just go up at the same time and then like you're all like lining up to fly, or are you like, is it like a peloton where you're like elbowing each other to like get the first flight down?
Yeah.
There was a little pre-race meeting. Jayme did a great job with it. He had organized the pre-race organization, all came through like an Instagram group, a huge group, what became a huge group message. I was added to the group by friends that introduced me to flying. And so I was one of the expansionary people that made it get out of control. But they did a great job. And the start was at the Orson Smith Trailhead. And it was just kind of start at a certain time. And people that knew they weren't going to be going crazy hard, held back because it's immediately kind of a single track. It's maybe a double track kind of space to pass. But just charge up there for close to an hour and then transition at the top and fly down. And then it was a 2-lap race the way they set it up.
The specifics to dive into, like the safety of it, right? Like we don't want anybody rushing their launches, not doing their gear checks, because we're flying, right? It's a safe sport, but it can be bad if you don't prepare. So I had volunteers on launch to help people with their pre-flight checks quickly. And we also had a rule that you didn't launch within 30 seconds of any other competitor. So you gave yourself a window, a half-minute buffer between people launching. And based on the speeds of the people over the 50-minute ascent, that spread was actually quite nice. There was a little lineup in certain spots, but those people that were lined up typically weren't like super competitive, right? They're trying to beat their own PRs to the top of the hill. And we always, reiterated the fact that the race is on the ground, not in the air. The air is just, the flying is just the descent mechanism. While it is a factor in of time, that amount of time is negligible compared to the effort on the uphill, right?
So is it possible to with that 30-second gap, is it possible to catch someone who launched before you?
It's happened to me already
Really?
in 2 of the races.
Okay, you were on a huge wing.
But part of that, the first time I was on a wing. So wings behave differently, and for like the uninitiated, there are full-size wings. They're meant to glide efficiently, stay in the air, ride thermals. They're meant for longer flights and soaring. So they're bigger. They've got more force to hold more weight in the air. Then there's kind of this mini wing category, and it's a crossover where they are pretty efficient at gliding. They're not made to fly really fast. They're made to be smaller and lighter. So they're for really, hike and fly missions. And within that, there's even another category of lightness. I was on a single skin, so it's really light. It's a 1 kilogram wing and backpack combination, but it doesn't fly fast. It's not meant to fly fast. So I did get passed in the air on both launches.
Have you ever seen a bird just parked in the air? That was Brennan with his wings.
I was trying to come down.
He's like, go down, please. So
Cutting him off.
So mainly Speedmo has leaned more towards fast mini wings and speed wings specifically. The wing that Brennan flew is mainly like something that you would be doing a huge ascent effort with, and then flying back down because it's incredibly lightweight. It's
So
something.
that's an advantage on the uphill.
Yeah.
Okay.
But then I was hanging out in the air. for a
Yeah,
while.
he was parked in the air.
He wanted to watch.
Yeah.
Go down.
Yeah. Another thing I want to touch on too, in terms of like making sure that the pilots had the information they needed, is we had radio comms, Rocky Talkie specifically. They sponsored us and they're a wonderful partner, but we were able to give them, updates on the wind and the LZ constantly, which was really
cool.
helpful. And they'd announce who is flying and what wing they're flying each time they launched as well. The people who volunteered I'm super grateful for, because they're all pilots, they're all experienced, but they just didn't feel like competing. But the knowledge they have and the impact they have for the athletes is massive. Not only the stoke, like the hype up when they get there, but also just like the information, the rigidity of the structure on the launch is really important. And it's a flying sport, so you have to take it safely. Another rule is like, you're not trying anything new during these events while you're flying in these events, right? If you're a pilot who's been flying forever and maybe you're doing barrel rolls and proxy flying and opening new crazy lines in the Wasatch, never been flown before, there's pilots like that compete, but they're not pushing the limits of the sport during the competition, if that makes sense. They're not trying to, push the limits of their wing or their flying, that kind of stuff. They're participating to fly and compete in the actual race, if that makes sense. And that's just the theme across the board. It's the community is just a really, really cool one, and it's full of a bunch of very interesting humans. People
sure.
that, I don't know if you have more on that, but it's a really fun place to find ourselves working with these types of people.
Yeah. Just like any outdoor sport, you've got a great collection of people that really value the time outside and will sacrifice a lot to do it, and to be able to, scrape to buy the equipment that they need to do it. And I've heard this phrase that there's kind of a leisure class at both ends of the income spectrum, and you see that in these sports. I mean, I've spent a lot of my youth climbing and pursuing that pretty hard, and I'm able to now again because our kids are engaging in that and they're not just like suicide machine toddlers at the crag now. So we've been climbing a lot more as a family. It's been nice, but yeah.
That's hilarious. Suicide machine. I think you'd said that you had a story about one of the athletes that competed in the races before we started. Who was that?
So Landon McDowell is his last name.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Landon has innovated a lot. Jayme threw the first two races in the spring. We kind of formed Speedmo. After I competed in that, I was like, I want to help. Like, let's make this a big thing and see what we can do to grow it. And a side note is that this is the first race of its type, really, that we're aware of. There are other paragliding races, but they're typically multi-day, multi-stage, long distance. So this one is meant to be fast. It's handled in a couple of hour period rather than days. And so it's unique and maybe the first of its kind. So we feel a lot of pressure to do it right, be good stewards, pull the community from this area that's supporting and is starting to support regionally. We're getting pressure to already do a race in Europe next year. And so we're trying to look at our next year's calendar and try to go pretty big and hopefully not overstretch what we can handle. But I lost my train of thought there. Yeah, Landon. Landon has been the first really really example that we've seen of somebody taking the sport and innovating like crazy already. And so just with 4 races, he's been practicing with the timer at home, his transition speed, making modifications to his harness so that he doesn't, because typically your backpack folds inside out. And so the wing is in it. Okay. When you get up, you pull the wing out, you pop the wing back or the backpack backwards. And on the inside, which is now on the outside, is a harness. Okay. And you can pre-clip it to the wing. And most people were doing that. Landon was going even further to be able to be able to drop the pieces that go under your leg and then just clip them. And he had his wing ready to just toss. And in theory, if there's a little bit of a breeze, you could toss it and it never even touches the ground. So you toss, reverse, turn, run, and you're off. And he does a lot of base jumping. So he's kind of the right athlete to really be hyper-focusing on that and succeeding. But he transitioned very, very fast. And it would be fun. If you attach media to these, we could probably get his head cam footage of his throw and go launch at the last race. It was pretty fast.
So cool.
I have that right here on the phone. He actually wasn't even considered in one of the top 3 favorites to win. But he
Just
pushed.
because no one knew who he was?
No,
or-
everybody knows who he is, but basically he was nobody had considered him like a fast runner or athlete.
Okay.
But he pushed himself physically, but he also planned ahead with his gear to where he overtook the favorite to win by 5 seconds at the first Speedmo. So
Whoa.
Spencer Allen is one of the top athletes and one of the best pilots in the Wasatch. And he was the favorite to win because the guy's hiking mountains and he's an arborist by trade. He's just constantly using his body day in and day out. He's an incredible athlete. And so thankfully for Landon, Spencer had worked a 16-hour shift or something the day prior, and Landon just hung on right behind him the entire time during the race. And then Landon just deployed his wing faster and got off the hill, leading to that. Spencer almost caught him on the downhill flight, but yeah, it was a really cool aspect to see. And that really opened my eyes. I was like, oh, this can be very tight and competitive. This can be something that is pushed. Something I wanted to touch on too is like, these athletes aren't just speed flyers. They're incredible alpinists. They're skiers. They're climbers. They're people that are pushing really, really great things in the Wasatch that nobody's done before. And that's something I want to highlight about Speedmo is like, it was started with flying because logistically that was the biggest challenge, right? I wanted to get the flying dialed because I want Speedmo to grow to actually encompassing all parts of alpinism with skiing, like touring, splitboarding, whatever, climbing, scrambling, running. I want all those aspects to be involved in races in the future and not just only flying. We didn't mention this yet, but there's a sport called speed riding, which is skiing with the wing.
I read about that before this. I watched some videos.
Yeah. And so that's another thing we want to offer in Speedmo in the winter is basically a skimo event with speed riding involved as an option, right? So if the weather doesn't pan out, you just ski down. But if it does work out, you fly down. And so the variances on decision making for these mountaineer athletes is going to be really interesting. You're going to have people that might win by skiing down instead of flying because they didn't have to worry about transitioning their wing out, right? There's going to be, wins and losses based on decisions that are made in terms of speed and like in gains in placement. And so that's where the exciting part is like Speedmo is set to grow. We've got an incredible amount of support from brands globally. Like very fast, right? The interest blew up. It's something that I'm very excited about. And having Brennan as a partner here to like dial me in on the endurance aspect of things is really great. Like I do quite a bit of stuff out in the outdoors, but not at the scale he does. And I think I couldn't have found a better person that like balances me out in terms of what the goals are that we have set for ourselves and the deliverables we need to give to the people we're partnered with.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I feel the same way because Jamie's really good at all the things I suck at, like scheduling a lot of phone calls, and talking to people and coordinating.
I'm a professional yapper.
Really good at that. Really good at that. It's valuable.
That was a tangent. Sorry, that was a lot.
No, it's okay.
Yeah.
Endurance wise though, like you'd said you were really obsessed with like moving quickly through the mountains. Like what are the things, I guess, that you're obsessed with that's been able to help Speedmo be what it is so far?
Yeah, it's hard to put my finger on it because I've not like excelled to the point where I can point to like an accomplishment and say like this is why, because it leads you to this thing. I just like it. It's really fun to just make things really fast. And so I have a 10-year-old daughter that's really into climbing, and so we've been able to go do multi-pitch climbs together, and that's like this whole problem solving set of like figuring out how to do that with a really light 10-year-old girl. And I'm not like a big person, but I will crank her out of a belay station if I fall. And so trying to figure out those systems and then do them quickly because they can become more complicated. There was a quick foray into like speed climbing on Big Wall that I went into with a friend a few years ago, and we kind of had a flame out experience on El Cap and got halfway up in like a really fast time. And I'm not patting myself on the back. It's been done way faster. I think we were like 6 hours to get halfway up, but it just like roasted my brain. I was so tired of translating. I'd never been on that route before on the nose. And I was like translating black and white lines to the route that I was having to lead. And we were like French freeing. But I loved the experience of all the training that led up to it. And then this experience. And I'd like to go back and maybe not do it quite that fast because I realized some things about that experience that was like, this is more risk than I want to take on moving this fast. But I just love doing that with a lot of different sports. FKTs are really fun in running because it's just, you can find these areas for gains that aren't just about being supported or things. I love the unsupported kind of ethic if you can hit it on certain traverses and things. And it's just fun to tap into. It's more intellectually stimulating than just going out and running marathons or something really, really fast. You put the mountain element into it and you have that whole other aspect of how to move fast. And it's fascinating the time that can happen between, like, it's all the little stuff. Like if you go with rock climbing guides and see people that have just done it their whole life, 30 plus years, and they're just like so dialed and so fast with the smallest things. They learn to do a thing once instead of clipping here and then moving it and then readjusting. It's like those things all add up. And that's going to become a highlighted focus of Speedmo as we produce kind of side media and YouTube things about transitions between different sports and flying, or different sports. And then we even had this fun experiment with our steep mountain race that was this extra aspect of like, is it faster to run the course? And we kind of engineered a course that was originally Jayme's idea. I went out and tested it. And then we kind of like fixed on it as like, yeah, we're going to do this as a course, because it was kind of this question of like, can you run this faster, or can you run and fly it faster? And I think some of these courses like that one, I can't actually remember. I think it was run faster by a couple minutes, but maybe not.
It was close. The pilots did win.
Okay.
But it was
a
really
different
close.
pilot beat the person that was the fastest running, who was then like second or third hiking and flying. So.
Any runners listening right now, I highly recommend you go check out the course for Steep Mountain and run that for 2 laps as fast as you can and report back. I think it's going to be one of the shortest, most challenging trail running races.
It's gnarly.
It's horrifying.
You have to run flat fast for like a mile and then do a pretty annoyingly steep ridge that feels like you can run it, but not very fast. Then you go up and down across the ridge, and then you have might be the steepest descent that I've ever like run that hard on. I mean, it's like if runners are familiar with the Mount Marathon race in Seward, Alaska, the downhill where they're just ripping down this shale slope, like that at least has shale on it. This doesn't.
Controlled.
It's
like
just
it's like
dirt BBs on a. It's the Widowmaker and Draper. They used to race like modified dirt bikes up it to see if they could get to the top.
The Widowmaker.
Yeah.
So that's that bottom part.
So we have a competitor, Rylan Shadag. He's an incredible hybrid athlete. Watching him descend that at full speed was horrifying. The guy was like sprinting downhill, but he'd occasionally just jump and slide. And I was like, he stood up and I was like, how are you not bleeding everywhere? But
we need like a camera view of like the athlete, but also like spectator view too of everyone just like.
Yeah. The cool thing about that course too is if you run it the opposite direction, you do the Widowmaker first. It's all really interesting. So I think in a future race, we might have it one direction for the first lap and the other direction for the second. Because Widowmaker is not to be trifled with. It's a really, really intense uphill. And like the funny thing is all these pilots are hiking it 2 to 3 times a night just to do laps on their speed wings at the north side, which is really fun. But yeah, it turned out to be a very interesting course. As Brennan said, it was kind of a surprise for us.
Yeah, I saw it. I had seen it on Strava and I was like, oh, that looks like kind of gnarly to run up that ridge with like a little pack on. But yeah, I really want to come watch one. I was bummed when I couldn't watch. You had one, like 2 weeks ago, I think?
We have one this weekend if the weather permits.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to ask more details on that after this. Well, I'll put them in the description too for anyone who's wondering, who's listening to the episode. But
there's so many aspects to this. You asked about kind of the topic of speed and how to, maybe the value of it and things. And it's one of the things that we're most excited for is just kind of the peripherals outside of just races. Races really bring the community together and help us like kind of shape and form the sport. And then we'll start introducing other things that are not just like dry foot uphill, like trying to introduce skimo uphill and flight and try to combine those things as we figure it out. But there's other aspects on the peripheral where we're trying to become kind of a repository for stories from speed mountaineers and just flights where they're not trying to go as fast as possible, but just checking out new lines, penetrating the wilderness, exploring new places. And so we're going to be publishing more stories. We already have one great one up and another one in the progress from the community. And then hoping to become kind of a house for FKTs, because there's this like popular FKT website, as it's now so commonly known, that's really focused on just running like foot only. And they allow some other modes of transportation, but it has to be like a very small part of the effort and required for that route. And ours don't quite fit. They fit their current definition, but we know that's not what they're trying to track there, like hike and fly combination. So we're hoping to become, again, like a repository for fastest known times with that. So it's like ski up, fly down, hike up, fly down. And some of the mountains and things where you can run, you can't fly. So we're going to be navigating that space with jurisdictions and wilderness boundaries and things like that. But there's all these other elements. And then generally, I think we're also just trying to help people find the education to get into it, both on how to get faster, how to transition, like you were asking about, but also on just like how to get into flying. And so we have people that ran our steep mountain race that do not fly. They only ran, and they came to only run, and they've never flown before. And so we're hoping that it's a bridge to people between sports to learn about flying and other sports, and be able to still compete and like rub shoulders with those people that are in other sports they're interested in.
Yeah, to touch on that too, is that we've partnered with all the local paragliding schools and speed flying schools, which is really helpful. And we provide discounts to people who attend a Speedmo event for anyone who wants to learn, which is really cool. It's a meaningful amount too. I'm not going to announce it, but like if you're keen to learn how to fly, let us know. We'll give you a discount code if you attend a Speedmo event. Yeah.
That's awesome. I like the idea of it being like a hub for these like hybrid alpinist athletes who can like get beta or like even get into the sport. I had read the story that you guys have up on like, it's like almost a blog post, I guess, and there's photos and stuff. And I did have a few questions. Like he talked about some difficulty after getting to kind of the top of his route. What happens if you can't fly down? Are there situations where you can't fly down off of something?
It's smart to plan to not be able to fly, because if you plan with the assumption that you're flying, you may not have enough calories, water, things, so you could shortchange yourself.
Not enough food, and I was like stressing internally for him.
Yeah. And I think the reality is like even a big mountain like that, you can hike off in a few hours. So you're probably a lot like that particular athlete is fit enough to probably make it off with like a pretty limited amount of calories. Some people maybe not, but I think that just comes down to judgment, which judgment is the number one factor. It's even a question when you are getting your license on the one of the required tests. Like in flying, wings, judgment is the number one factor that determines your safety more than anything. You can know everything about the weather. You can have a great wing. You can do all the things right. But if you exercise poor judgment, that's when things go wrong. So, and that's why it is risky still. Like other sports are more forgiving. Like you can put yourself in dangerous positions running, but there's not a lot relying on your judgment. It's going to be something accidental. It's not really judgment. And so I think it just comes down to judgment and making those safe decisions. But it's good to plan to like hike down as a backup.
Have you, either of you, ever been in a situation where like you'd planned to fly down but had to hike down?
Oh yeah. I mean, there's a joke that this sport's actually called para-waiting, because you're waiting for the proper weather windows. I mean, that's the thing is like, if you're too keen to fly, you're probably not going to have a good time, because you're trying to push, you're supposed to fly the day, not the desire, or whatever that saying is. It's like you should be flying good conditions and planning for bad ones just in case. I'm very conservative when I fly, and like I'll even if the vibe is off of the group I'm hiking with or something, I'll probably walk down instead. I really like to feel comfortable and just have a really good time. I'm all about having a good time instead of like pushing limits. And there's people that are built to push limits, like Landon, for example, like on that climb and that flight he did. I think that's amazing that he was skilled enough to do that. It was really cool to see. I mean, his line broke and he tied it and modified his brake line in order to fly.
He was like, luckily it was an easy fix. I tied it. And I was like,
yeah,
you tied it?
Yeah. We have another story going up from a newly local girl on one of her missions in the Eastern Sierra, which is really cool. An effort there. But yeah, it's a creative aspect. And like Brennan said, the judgment aspect is the biggest one, right? Mm-hmm. It's like these types, alpine sports in general won't be sustainable for people who make poor decisions or are too keen to do a certain thing. You got to know when to call it. You got to be responsible, and you got to approach this from a sustainable mindset, or you're just going to be broken by, you're going to have a bad time, I think, I don't know. I've noticed, and this is something I want to touch on too, but like I've noticed in the outdoor industry, a lot of major brands are hesitant to get involved with air sports, right? Because they see their athletes and as a risky maneuver they're doing, right? And it's marketed that way a little bit. Like, for example, Will Gadd, someone who I've spoken to a few times, and I'm trying to figure out we're trying to work on a project together, but his schedule's nuts, and so is mine. Basically, he is an incredible climber, but he paraglides out of passion, right? And a lot of his major brand sponsors don't support his paragliding. Like he's supported by Jayme Paragliders, which is great, but like you don't see a ton of support for air sports currently. And I think that they should be more legitimized and considered an Alpine skill set. And that's kind of what we're trying to push with Speedmo. Also, if I ramble or something, please edit this out.
I haven't heard any ramble.
Okay,
yet,
cool.
So.
Yeah. But yeah, our brand partners have been really, really supportive. I don't know if I'm allowed to list those off or not.
Yeah.
Okay,
Totally.
cool. Like it started with Arc'teryx, and then locally Black Diamond has been incredible. They every single, I think pilot is using some sort of Black Diamond piece of equipment, whether it's a pack, poles, things like that. Helmet, yeah. And they just released some new packs that are really lightweight and really cool. And we've given Black Diamond equipment out and Arc'teryx equipment out during the prizes, which is like actually very meaningful prizes for these athletes. And they're incredibly useful things to have. The feed for nutrition has been great because they've given us a bunch of nutrition for the races, and all these guys are eating like garbage. They're all on a budget. And so once they first had their first taste of like good nutrition, they're like, oh, I feel amazing. Like, and so like, it's been a really cool thing to get that involvement there. And they're able to try a bunch of different types of nutrition instead of have to like eat Skittles or something like that, and it's just, sorry if that's a trademarked thing, my bad. Yeah. But yeah, the outpour of support from global brands has been really, really massive for this. And some have come to me and offered me thousands and thousands of dollars for like things. And I've been like, we don't need that yet. We're scaling, but we're not going to be like, I don't, what do you call that? Like leapfrogging ahead of where we're at in place. So we've been asked to come host in Europe next year, and we're going to probably do 1 or 2 races there, which is going to be really, really cool because the Euros are going to go crazy. And we're going to hopefully get a bunch of American athletes out there to show them what's up. But it'll be a very interesting experience to see how that goes and bring Speedmo over there. But yeah, did you want to jump in there?
Well, I'm excited for that one because managing weather there is typically a little bit easier.
Yeah.
The Alps are surprisingly calm. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why you see people flying there almost all day long every day in Chamonix, right? They're just in the air the whole time.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
Yeah. It's like riding a bike there. If you don't fly, it's like silly. Like what, I'm currently working on EU citizenship. So
On a what?
EU citizenship. Yeah.
So you can go out there and fly.
Yeah. Yeah. I work remotely, and so does my partner. And so I feel like that would be an incredible opportunity to spend time out there and do that. But yeah, that's the next step, is getting our race set up in Europe in the Alps, and then continue hosting them here in the Wasatch. We've partnered with the CWC, Central Wasatch Commission, for sustainability efforts, and they're pretty keen on our sport because it's actually more sustainable than even hiking, which, like I said earlier, which is cool. But yeah, there's a lot of local companies and teams that are super stoked on this, and it's been really fun. Yeah.
Well, I'm really excited to follow it. Like, it sounds like, there is a huge space for it, and it sounds like you guys are like doing a good job of filling that space.
Hopefully.
If there are any of our listeners who want to follow along or who want to participate, where can they find you guys at?
Yeah, if you search Speedmo on Instagram, I think we have an underscore at the end because of a name holding thing, but we'll get it someday. But it will come up just because we have a more active account, and so search Speedmo. It's SPEEDMO. And then we have underscore.
Yeah.
And so Instagram, we do a little bit on Facebook. We're going to be doing more there to interlink it. It's been easier to set up on Instagram, but we'll be scheduling the events on Facebook. I know some people add to their calendars and do that through Facebook. I don't use Facebook very often, but we'll be doing that. And then we have a website, speedmo.org, and there's a lot and more will come on the website in terms of stories. That's where you can register and look at the courses and the upcoming races and events. We do have other events. We did a great info session at the BD store in downtown Salt Lake one night, had a great showing. We had a paragliding harness set up on a simulator, so you could kind of like sit in it, feel like you're hanging, you're suspended, and see what that feels like. And we had a video playing on a big screen, several videos of different people flying lines, and then we did some, a story recap and talked about Speedmo. And we're going to be doing more of those. Those are great to attend if somebody has interest or even wants to just come like hang out and learn about something. And so we'll be doing all that. But yeah, Instagram, a little bit on Facebook, and the website for sure. Is there another means of following Speedmo?
We do smoke signals too, but those usually get blown out in the wind now.
We might do an email newsletter at some point if we find time to write emails.
Yeah, I think if you're not a pilot yet, we are going to be hosting multiple evenings throughout the year with like local speakers who are pilots and local wing manufacturers, like Kevin from Fluid Wings. He makes the wings here, designs them in Salt Lake, which is really cool. So it's an incredible resource to have, not only to learn about the sport and how to access it, but just like to meet a bunch of people that do it and have a great community aspect there too. Yeah, I mean, we'd love to get anybody involved. If you've ever even considered it, like happy to put you in touch with people for lessons, or go get a tandem flight with a tandem instructor who's local here. Again, like flying is a big aspect of Speedmo, and it's what makes us unique. And it was just the first thing we wanted to tackle and get people into, to make sure that they knew it was a legit part of alpinism.
Yeah, we're approachable and in the core of the community. And so if there's anybody that wants to educate, try lessons, whatever, we can connect and make introductions, and we have the time to be able to do that. So we don't want anybody to feel like we're out of reach. So, if you have any thoughts, like please contact us and let us help.
Very cool. I always ask our guests to leave our listeners with one piece of actionable advice, and it can be like related to Speedmo or paragliding or just like a life thing. So both of you, maybe separately, what is one piece of actionable advice you would give to anyone who's listening?
Pressure.
I know. It's kind of
something that I like to live by is like, I have very strong opinions, but I hold them extremely loosely. So like, I'm really always open to get my mind changed, but I'm very passionate about my opinions while they're held. So I think pushing yourself to change your mind about something is really, really good for your mentality in general. So I would always that's what I want to say is the advice is like, try to change your own mind about something, sometime soon, whatever it might be. If it's something strong, weak, whatever it is, like give yourself the ability to do so, because it lets you be more flexible throughout your life in general. Yeah, I had a turning point in my life where I was like, oh, I'm an asshole. I need to change who I am, And I think that having that realization, like that was when I was very young, not recently an asshole.
We're glad to meet you after that turning point.
Exactly. No, it's just like having the ability to change and like consider something from a different angle and be able to change your own mind is really powerful and important and empowering for people. So that's my piece of advice, is just be open to that.
Yeah, I think mine adds on top of that. I know it's a little bit cliche right now. I've at least seen it on one t-shirt, but just the idea of being kind. And I think it kind of adds on to what Jayme's saying, is like, if you've got a mind that's open to change and information, I think we're seeing a lot of like divisiveness in society. And I think a lot of it is not actually between people, but it's being told to us by media and different outlets. And I don't know what the purpose of that is. It seems really sad, but I think just being kind. I've seen a lot of kindness in the community. So I've come into the flying community in the last 2 years, and I've seen a lot of kindness in both offering mentorship, noticing things that you can improve on, and honestly more kindness in that regard than I have even in other sports. I think sports and society in the outdoors, it's kind of like opening up and becoming more kind. But historically, some of these niche sports that have a safety risk factor to them, like climbing, there can be gatekeeping. Sometimes like people hold their beta about gear or routes or access, safe descents, like they hold it close to their chest, or sometimes even secretly. And I think that's opening up more, but I would encourage more of it. Withholding information or being unkind, not inclusive, those sort of things can actually create a pretty dangerous environment, physically, but also just in other long-lasting ways. So I've seen a lot of kindness in this space, and hopefully that Speedmo can be more and more of an organization that fosters that kind of community embrace and kindness. So, yeah,
the kindest people I've ever met have been in like the mountain community.
Mhm.
It's literally the best place to be.
It's because you're not in the baking community. No, I'm
The
just
baking
kidding.
community. Okay, true. Maybe. I don't know. The
I don't know.
knitting.
That's a random guess.
Baking? Like cookies?
Baking.
Oh, yeah.
They seem
Probably, like,
gentle.
share their baked
Yeah.
goods.
I made muffins.
Have you ever watched the British baking show? They're pretty gentle people.
I don't know.
I don't know. Their quips are pretty heavy, man. There's some trauma behind those words, I think. But yeah.
That could be.
Yeah.
Motivation.
I don't have the
It's
patience
over
for
my head.
baking. I just want to eat the dough.
Buy
It's
it.
more calorie dense before you bake it anyway.
Well, thank you guys so
Sorry.
much for coming.
Thank you.
And I'm going to link Speedmo stuff in the description and also your personal socials and everything there so that our listeners can follow you guys.
They don't want to follow us individually.
Yeah, no,
Just
just
follow
follow
Speedmo.
Speedmo. Yeah. My account, yeah, it's not interesting.
It's mostly flying, FYI, for everyone listening. Okay, thank you guys.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Abby.